but less complicated than a limited liability company, an LLC, which we covered in last class. And that's primarily because we're all familiar with corporations. LLCs are kind of a hybrid entity, as I discussed last time, between a corporation and a partnership. But corporations are pretty straightforward. What you should have on your screen is the primer I sent, I don't know, maybe 10 minutes ago or so for you guys to keep and save. And Liz is also going to have them added up into Elmo. So basically, again, it's what is a corporation? I think you guys know that. You think about Apple, IBM, whatever. It's simply a business entity organized and existing under the laws of the Commonwealth of Virginia. Now, you all will have periodically somebody who sort of has a business, at least they have a name that's a business. So you can be a sole proprietor and do business under a given name. That doesn't make you a corporation. You're still a sole proprietor with a fictitious or trading as, doing business as name. And, that would be a good topic, and I'll add that to the Zoom list because those can be a little bit complicated. But this isn't that. A corporation is a formal business entity organized in a state. Doesn't have to be Virginia. Who owns a corporation? Well, it's owned by its shareholders. Who can sign for a corporation, which is what we're really concerned with today. As a general proposition, a corporation does business through its corporate officers. The structure of a corporation is the shareholders own it. They appoint a board of directors, and those directors are charged with, the overall strategic sort of management of the corporation. And the board of directors will select officers to carry out the board of directors' desires and goals. And we typically think about that in terms of a president, and that's usually who you'll see sign. But large corporations, you can, the directors and the directors really, but the board of directors can authorize any corporate officers to sign in a particular context. But we're usually dealing with the president. The governing documents of a corporation. A corporation begins its life by filing what are known as articles of incorporation with the state. And I'm going to speak specifically about Virginia, our entity that controls that, or department or agency, is the State Corporation Commission. And we refer to that as the SEC. If the SEC finds the articles in proper order, the State Corporation Commission issues a certificate of incorporation. That begins the entity's life. The organizers, owners, shareholders will enact bylaws. And so those bylaws become the written rules, so to speak, for how the corporation is managed and run and exists. So those three things: the articles of incorporation, the certificate of incorporation, and then the bylaws. So that kind of logically brings us to the next step, which is when a corporation sells property, that is when you have a corporation as a seller on one of your listings, and it's going to go to closing, what's going to be required of them? Just like with LLCs, the buyer settlement agent and the title insurer, and the lender for that matter, are going to want to know that the corporation is still in good standing. And so we can request and do, and your seller, anybody really, can request what's known as a certificate of good standing. And that'll be a certificate issued by the State Corporation Commission saying, yes, they're still organized and existing under the law of Virginia. We're going to need a corporate resolution authorizing the transaction. That might seem unnecessary, but it really is. Corporations or corporate officers really don't necessarily have the inherent power to sell the major assets of the corporation. And real estate is typically a major asset. So again, the insurer and the buyer settlement agent are going to want to see a resolution from the board of directors authorizing the sale or purchase of real estate and reflecting who has the power and authority through the board of directors to sign for that transaction. So that's what a corporate resolution is. And it's typically very simple. It doesn't have to be complicated. We'll see some complicated ones, REO deals, for example, where major corporations, with hundreds of millions or billions of dollars in assets, they can't have one guy signing all that stuff or gal across the country. So they'll have a 20-page corporate resolution authorizing all sorts of things and 20 vice presidents or the like to sign. But in a typical deal that we do here, a simple resolution suffices. In our case, Lytle Title will coordinate that. At the law office, we draft them if necessary. They're also the title insurer, in this case, First American with us, but they're all the same. They're also going to want to see the articles of incorporation, the bylaws, any amendments to that stuff. And when I say satisfactory evidence, that's typically going to be, that the person has the authority to sign. That should be covered by the corporate resolution. And we occasionally see this, if the corporation is formed in another state, the funny thing is, somebody will read on the internet that, we ought to incorporate, they live in Virginia and the property's here. They'll read on the internet, well, you ought to incorporate in Delaware or Nevada because they're so corporate friendly. Well, they are corporate friendly, but it makes no difference on like holding title to real estate in Virginia. So if they were formed in a different state, then we're going to need to see that they've got authority to transact business in Virginia. I don't think you need to worry about it that much, but if you happen to know your seller or your buyer, for that matter, or organized in a different state, then there's going to be another step that's required. And quite frankly, most times, like the one I described, they don't get that done. They're just not paying attention. The requirements for buying are similar, if not identical, to the requirements when buying and selling. They're fundamentally the same. Going to need a certificate of good standing, the corporate resolution, evidence the person has the authority to sign the documents, and the certificate of registration if they're not organized in Virginia. If it's a cash deal, so you got a cash, and this happens obviously a lot. You've got a investor buyer client, and maybe they're paying cash. If they aren't getting owner's title insurance, so in other words, there's no title insurance involved, there's no lender involved, then nobody's going to fundamentally care. And a lot of these documents may not be requested because if the person is, quite frankly, too dumb to pay attention to that, we're not going to pay attention to it for them. Now, between you and me, we typically look at this stuff, but there's not going to be any requirement that it be provided because there's no title insurance and there's no lender. Does that make sense? Oh, by the way, since I can't see anybody nod their heads, well, I guess I could, but Allison's in her car and she's bobbing her head to music anyway. So, yeah, Allison, I did see you in your car, but I don't know if you're bobbing your head or not. In any event, the chat, I'm paying attention to the chat box. So if you guys have any questions, just send them. I thought what I'd do, just like I did with LLCs, is give you some sample emails that you can just cut and paste. If you've got a buyer client and you contract gets offers accepted and you got a deal going, you just cut and paste this language, because what usually happens is this stuff just ends up coming up at the last minute, and everybody's scrambling. So we all want to try and make the closings as smooth as we possibly can. So, just cutting and pasting this stuff and getting that conversation started and the document, somebody working on the documents, I think would be really helpful. I have highlighted your lender because if, as I discussed a moment ago, if the buyer's paying cash, then there's no lender to require, the buyer's own lender doesn't exist. So you would just take that language out. The email to the seller and a listing you've got where the seller's accepted an offer. Again, it's nearly identical, same stuff, same description. So, I hope you can use them and you'll get some benefit out of that. Just remember that it's there, cut and pasting. What can go wrong? Well, like I just said, what goes wrong is we're scrambling around at the last minute to get the documents. And quite often, people, again, want to form, they see this on the internet, they want to form their own corporation. They don't do it very well. They don't get all the documents drafted and signed. And then so there's a lot of scrambling at the last minute to try and get that done. One thing you guys can really help us with is, I know you're taking your client's word for it about the name of the corporation and whether it is a corporation. And there's not a whole lot wrong with relying on what a client tells you, but make sure you get that right and make sure it's correct on the contracts, because a settlement agent, whether it's Lytle Title or not, we don't know until later on when we get the contract and we're starting to get requirements from the title insurer and those things start to get checked. But like I said, if you just write Brian's Hot Dogs, I don't know whether, that's Brian as a sole proprietor or a corporation or an LLC, and these things make a difference. Brian just asked me, can you check good standing on the website? Which, Brian, brings us to the very next thing. So let me see if I can redo my screen share here. Okay, so you guys should see my Google now, and what I'm going to do, and the way you can do this, whether it's a corporation or an LLC or anything registered with the State Corporation Commission. So if you guys will just type Virginia SEC, why isn't this typing? Entity search. Just click on the hit. And then this brings you up to the State Corporation Commission's website. And it's really very easy. So let's just, we'll do Liz Moore. Now, Liz Moore and Associates is an LLC, but and it tells you it's a limited liability company. But if you were searching on a corporation, I mean, it will pull up corporations just as easily. And then you can click on the link. You can find out whether the entity's still active. And you can get the formal name of the full formal name of the company. So you can really get a lot of that here. And Brian, to ask your question. So I think that answers the question. Can you check good standing and name? Yes, you can. And look, and it's very easy. Now I have an account that allows me to do a lot of different things that you might not be able to do. But one of those things is to get a certificate of good standing. So that's how that's done. But you guys, this is just all public information and you can easily do it yourself. And again, the search would just be, Virginia SEC entity search or something around that. And you'll find it pretty easily. There are a lot of hits on that. Let's see, let me go back. Hold on a second, yeah, that should be. Okay, so we should be back to the primer. So that's, we've talked about what can go wrong, how can you look it up, Now I just want to show you, to finish up, how you sign or have your company sign. And this is an example of a regular signature block that you would see in a typed out contract. Brian's Hot Dogs, Inc. for a corporation by Brian D. Lytle, president, and that's my world famous signature. When you do your contracts electronically, you effectively do this. And thanks to Jackie, this time I can show you what that looks like in transaction desk, for example. So Jackie's used a seller as an example. So it's a seller noted here. The contact is Brian Lytle. The legal name is Brian's Hot Dogs, Inc. Signing with, so that my signature appears, Brian D. Lytle, president. So on your contract, in the VR contract, for example, but it'll be on the same on RAIN or CVR, or our Northern Next friends contracts and MLS up there. But anyway, so it's going to show in the contract that it's, Brian's Hot Dogs, Inc. And then down on the signature block, it'll show Brian D. Lytle, president. And when I electronically sign that, that will be written out here, or, you guys know how that works. So it's really that simple. Again, to kind of summarize, get the name right, check it out, make sure they're active, cut and paste the email, get them working on the documents, and it's good. We do corporate buyer and seller closings all the time, and they don't need to be hard. And we, whether the agents or the clients have done a good point or a good job up until the end or not, we get them done. But, at the company and then at the title company, we want to make them as easy and as smooth as possible. And this will help. So you guys have any questions for me? I don't see anything else in the chat room.
You're awesome, Brian. Thank you.